So, yeah.
Let's go.
Okay, colleagues. So we're live, and I'm going to hit you with a little promo thing, and then when I get back, it's over to you, Kojo.
There's a land just off the Atlantic, land of jungles, waterfalls, and sweet scenery, where poor people farm the lands and hunt the waters, and all live in peace and harmony. This is Guyana, beautiful Guyana.
GBJ guests, good evening, and thanks for joining us once again for this episode of Nation Building, Guyana Beyond 2030. And this evening, we're particularly pleased to have with us a real stalwart and a statesman in our former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Industry and Trade, and also Home Affairs, and currently one of the more eminent election commissioners serving on the Guyana Electoral Commission. Clement, welcome and good evening.
Thank you. Are you hearing me?
Loud and clear, Clement. Although we can't, we're trying to reconcile the live look with the look on your book from your book launch.
Okay. Don't worry. It's not a question of mistaken identities. Okay.
Okay. Clement, we're going to just roll into your biopic, which I'm sure will be fascinating, and many people are queuing up to hear. But I just want to say, in terms of GBJ and what we're doing at RLT, is that this is a forum to allow people of distinction like yourself to tell their stories in 10 to 15 minutes, uncurated, unfiltered, and then to engage in a substantial discussion around, given your experience, given your insights, what is it that you believe Guyana going forward looks like or should look like? And on the way, that discussion will obviously deal with current issues, and that will be inevitable. But the focus of what we're trying to do is to build up an archive of biopics by individuals, autobiographies, essentially, and also have an in-depth discussion about the way forward for Guyana, building it on what's happening currently. So why don't we jump straight into your biopic?
Thank you. Well, that first, those two pictures is the beginning of the person with whom you are interviewing. That's my grandparents, my grandmother, and my grandfather. My grandmother had her origins in Barbados, and my grandfather was born Guyanese. But they met each other here in British Guyana at the time, and they got married. And you notice I mentioned there but that's my grandfather on my mother's side that you're seeing there now. He was a bandmaster of the Guyana Police Force, a British Guyana Police Force in those days. And he wrote several pieces, which I had the beauty or which I have the privilege of listening to while I was Minister of Home Affairs. I'd asked them to play it for me, which they did. And I was very happy to hear the pieces which he had composed for the Guyana Police Force Band. Now, there are 6 of us, 3 boys and 3 girls. I don't know if you could identify me somewhere there, the second from the left. My 3 brothers and my 3 sisters, they've all passed away with the exception of my youngest sister, which is standing in the middle. That's Margaret, and myself. So out of the 6 children, only 2 are alive as we speak. They're all born in Guyana, and they all stayed in Guyana. And I'm happy to know that I have at least 1 sibling remaining of the 6. Well, that's young Clement Rohee. At the age of 18, I had just gotten into politics then. I was invited to the headquarters of the People's Progressive Party to look at some films that were made about the war in Vietnam. And I was very impressed with what I saw. And in fact, it was those movies. There were 6mm movies at the time, or 16mm, sorry, movies at the time that helped to mold my understanding of the world outside of Guyana and how people were fighting for their freedom and justice. And so in 1974, myself and Dr. Jagan was in Addis Ababa. In fact, he was taking me to many countries that he visited because he wanted me to get more international exposure. And perhaps that was what was laying the foundations for me to become eventually the international secretary of the party. And then later on, the foreign minister of Guyana. So that by the time 1974, I was very much acquainted, I wouldn't say totally, relatively speaking, very much acquainted with what is the world like outside of Guyana and what international relations are and how they impact on a small developing country like ours. In 1974, I was sent to Moscow to pursue studies in social sciences, political science, and the history of developing countries, as well as countries in the part of the world where we're from, Latin America and the Caribbean. And my visit to Moscow was another eye-opening, I would say, expanded my learning capacity. And then later on, in 1979, I went to, well, I would say I was invited to go to the World Market Review magazine that was in Prague, at the time Czechoslovakia, to contribute as a journalist to a magazine where more than 40 representatives from different countries were writing about or analyzing from a very scientific and Marxist point of view the developments in their respective countries. On my return to Guyana, I was asked to take on the responsibility of the international secretary of the party and later on the executive secretary of the party. Those were 2 heavy responsibilities which called upon me to travel extensively, representing the party in many parts of the world. And I was very pleased with those responsibilities, even though when I am at home, in Guyana, I was tasked with the responsibility to do serious political work as well. And so the international exposure helped me to relate many things outside to what is happening here in our country. Our party congress, soon after we got in the government in 1992, was held for the first time at Queen's College. That was a major breakthrough because for many, many years, we'd never had a party congress in the city of Georgetown. First, we had one at the Metropole Cinema. Sorry, not the Metropole Cinema, the Empire Cinema. That was when the civic component of the party was adopted at the Congress, and when Sam Hines was accepted as the prime ministerial candidate of the party for the party to face the elections in 92. And that Congress in 94 was the first Congress that was held when since we assumed office as a ruling party. So many of the stalwarts there you can see, many of them have passed on. Very few of them remain alive up to this day. But as you would know, the party has moved on. As the foreign minister of Guyana, of course, my responsibility had to do mainly with overseas travel, fulfilling the demands and the manifesto promises of the party overseas, One of the major responsibilities had to do with managing our relations with Venezuela. Of course, the president is always the man in charge of foreign affairs. And so it was under the direction of the president and the cabinet, of course, that I functioned as the Minister of Foreign Affairs. On that occasion, I met with Mr. Kofi Annan, and that was the then Foreign Minister of Venezuela, Mr. Angelo Borelli. Every year we had to meet with the Secretary General to perform the duties of his good offices, to brief him on how the relations were developing between Guyana and Venezuela. That process eventually came to an end when the government of Guyana requested that the matter be referred to the International Court of Justice, so that the consultations with the Secretary General ended and it moved now to the legal arena. I also had the responsibility almost every year since Dr. Jagan as the president couldn't make it, and if Mr. Jagan as the president also could not make it, my responsibility was to address the United Nations General Assembly. And that was the first time in 1996 when I addressed the General Assembly of the United Nations. That was indeed a very, very great honor for me to represent Guyana and to speak to the process that was taking place in the country. I also was the chairman of the G77 on China while as foreign minister. And that responsibility also took me to many countries in the world who were members of the G77 on China. And that was the occasion, what you're seeing, when we had one of the summit meetings of the G77 in Cuba. Castro was, of course, very alive at that time, very healthy. He came to meet me at the airport, which I was very honored to be with him and for him to welcome me. And we had a long chat before he left to go to Havana City. And I proceeded to talk to the other ministers about the G77. And then in 1996, that was actually the last trip that President Jagan undertook as the president of the nation. He went to attend the World Food Summit in Rome. And he delivered a very powerful speech there, which was reproduced in many of the newspapers around the world and in Europe particularly. We had asked, or we had requested a meeting with the Vatican, with the Pope. And while we were in Rome attending that meeting, we got word that the Pope John Paul was willing to receive us. And so Dr. Jagan took me along with him. And what was interesting in that discussion was that Pope John Paul supported very much the question of debt relief, not only multilateral debt, but the bilateral debt as well, which was a big matter that was in the air at that time. And Pope John Paul supported the call for a new global human order, which was advanced by Dr. Jagan, and also the question of debt relief, which we were very much impressed about. And it was a clear understanding that the Pope was very much acquainted with a number of international issues facing developing countries. Now, this meeting with President Clinton, Dr. Jagan as the president could not attend that meeting. It was a meeting of heads of governments of the Caribbean community. He could not attend that meeting, and I was asked to represent the government that meeting at the White House. That particular meeting had to do with Haiti. That was the time when President Clinton was trying to find a way on how to address the problems of Haiti. What he wanted was governments to accept Haitian refugees into their respective jurisdictions because he felt that that was a way in which he could have helped resolve the problem. But as we know, as time went on, the problem was not resolved. Eventually, there had to be a military presence in Haiti to try to quell the situation there. As the foreign minister, I later on became the Minister of Foreign Trade and International Cooperation. That was a huge responsibility. And in fact, what made it even more, to use a word I would say more than somewhat even more responsible, was when the heads of government of CARICOM asked me to be the focal point at the WTO for the WTO negotiation that was taking place at the time. Also, I was asked to be the spokesperson for sugar, which was a big issue because the European Union had decided to shut down two areas of duty-free access to the Europe. One was on rice, and the other one was sugar. And as we all know, we suffered serious economic losses with the loss of the market access to Europe for our rice, and also for the eventual phasing out of the duty-free access for sugar to Europe. From foreign trade and international cooperation, I moved on to home affairs. Well, that was for me a totally different responsibility because most of my time as a minister I was spending outside of Guyana, treating with international issues and matters related to diplomacy. As the Minister of Home Affairs, that was a very tough job, I would say. But as they say, when the going gets tough, the tough gets going. And that was also a very difficult time because that was the time when the Fine Man gang was on the loose, when hundreds of people were killed as a result of the rampage of that gang. Because of that situation, we were asked to develop regional cooperation with Trinidad and Tobago particularly, and with Suriname, because these were the two countries that were not only neighbors to us, but had come forward to give us tremendous amount of help. And in that photo, you would see Dr. Luncheon, the Prime Minister who accompanied us on that visit, the Chief of Staff of the GDF and the Commissioner of Police. We all went there to discuss cooperation with the Surinamese authorities on crime fighting, drug trafficking, and so forth. So that was a memorable visit because of the persons that accompanied me. I went with to Suriname to treat with cross-border criminal activities. Suriname has always been very cooperative with us, with Guyana, on crime fighting issues, because as you know, many of some criminals, of course, would try to escape and cross the border and go over to Suriname. Here again, I'm with Mr. Santoki. That time he was an opposition leader. We had talks also with the opposition as well as the government authorities to discuss also cooperation in crime fighting, technical and other forms of cooperation between Guyana and Suriname. And Mr. Santoki, as you know, is now the president. He's facing elections on March the 25th. Sorry, on May the 25th. Elections will be held in Suriname. We will watch and see what takes place there and what the Surinamese people will decide on who governs the country for the next 5 years. Now, you know, in Suriname, especially in Nigeria, there are lots of Guyanese there also. This particular photograph is of great interest because there are some party stalwarts there. You have Mr. Hari Prasad Nakhtar, who's almost in his late 80s. Mr. Feroz Mohammed, a very outstanding member of parliament and leader of the party. He has died. He passed away a couple of years ago. And then at the extreme left is Mr. Hari Narayan Baldio from West Coast Bobis, a long-standing member of the party. In other words, what you have in this photograph are some of the old guard, as we want to say, of the party, one of whom has passed away. The others are still standing and making their contribution, not as actively as they used to do before, but in different ways, they're making a contribution. I had the opportunity as a politician to enjoy some moments of relaxation. And here you would see me in one of those moments of relaxation where I'm having a smoke. Of course, I smoked very heavily in those days, I suppose because of the pressure of the work. And I would take a few beers also with friends. So from time to time, I would find the time to have periods of relaxation, mainly with colleagues and with comrades to talk over politics and so forth. And then in July, in fact, during COVID, I took the opportunity during the lockdown to write this autobiography. I could not just sit and do nothing. So I said to myself, let me find something to do. And what I eventually did was to sit down and write this book, My Story, My Song, which in effect is my autobiography and my life story from the beginning I entered politics up to now at this point in time.
Amazing. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. There's a huge amount of material there, and I want to invite members of the who've joined us, of the public who've joined us, to send in any questions or comments you have, and some of them we'll be able to forward to Mr. Rohee over the course of the show. I want to introduce my fellow panelists, Leah Hernandez. This is Leah's second rodeo. She was there in the premiere one when we had Mr. Ralph Ramkaran on, and we're hoping still that Roel Johnson, who was meant to be part of this panel, will join us. David Singh, my colleague, and one of the initiators of this program, is unavailable. He's traveling. Leah, do you want to tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Good evening, everyone. Like Mr. Paris mentioned, my name is Leah Hernandez Collymore. I am a mommy, I am a wife, and former journalist, as well as currently I am an educator. I teach at a primary school along the Suzdijk Linden Highway, and I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Leah. And I really want to encourage members of the public to join us, not just as a guest, but there are opportunities available to join the panel. Because we're focusing on Guyana Beyond 2030, we're very keen to have younger members of the public who have an interest, not just in politics or journalism, but just Guyana, to become panel members so that they can put to people like Mr. Rohee, who've guided us so far, and ask them around how do they see Guyana going forward, because the young people of Guyana, you're going to own this project Guyana that we're in the midst of building. So please come and be part of our panel so you can ask and demand some of the questions, answers to the questions. Clement, can I kick this off? Clement, you got Barbados links. Does that suggest a big African input? I mean, tell us about that. You didn't spend too much time dealing with that, because I think most people assume that you're Indo-Guyanese.
No, well, my grandmother on my father's side, they came from Barbados. There are many Bajans who came to this country in the early days of British Guyana, and her parents brought her from Barbados to Guyana. Eventually, she became a nurse at that was called the Public Hospital Georgetown at the time, and she eventually met my grandfather, who is James Rohee, and he also worked at the Public Hospital Georgetown, and they got married. Now, out of that marriage came 5 girls and 2 boys. Most of them have passed away, including my dad, who you see there now. He's of mixed race. He went to England to become a soldier during the Second World War. You see him there in his uniform. And there he met my mom, who was of African descent as well. Her father was my grandfather, who was Clement Nichols, the bandmaster. And somehow or the other, they met. That's a long story. But they met, and this is Mr. Nichols, as you would see. That's her father. So they met in London. They got married. and then he brought her back to Guyana to live. So
Interesting.
in terms of my African connections or heritage, that's where it comes from. And I think it has an important role to play in my whole personality and my psyche to how I see race relations in Guyana, which we probably could come to at a later stage.
Well, no, I'd like us to come to it now because the PPP has a particular popular reputation, whether or not it's true, around its Indianness and its Hinduness. How would you characterize? I mean, how do you respond to that? That there's this particular nomenclature attached to it.
Okay, let me put it this way. I always tell people, and I'll be very frank here, I always tell people that if the PPP was indeed ideologically and in terms of its programs and policies totally Indianized, I don't think I would have found myself to be comfortable there. The reason why I had no difficulty with being a member and then eventually a leader within the PPP, it was because of the whole ideological orientation of the party. Remember, I told you, one of the issues that influenced me tremendously was the war in Vietnam. And you should know, or most people would know, that anyone who had knowledge of about the war in Vietnam, you speak to them nowadays, they will tell you how that molded their understanding and appreciation. So the point I want to make here to come to your question is that the ideology, the Marxist ideology, the scientific socialist ideology of the PPP was what was paramount for me within the party. It is true that the overwhelming majority of the members of the party are of East Indian descent. But when it comes to the leadership, because a lot depends on what the leadership is thinking and what is driving the leadership ideologically. So I found in that leadership great comfort in the ideological, theoretical, and philosophical appreciation. And therefore, in terms of its work, I mean, even when the party was in government between 1957 and 1964, even before 1957, when the party was formed, anyone who goes back and study the history of the party would see Ashton Chase, Yusuf Guyana, and many other Black leaders in the party. And that continued throughout my tenure within the leadership of the party, which is, I've said, there up to now. But I did not have any racial blinkers, and I am able to mix freely with all kinds of people, members and supporters, and members of the public in general. In fact, being Minister of Home Affairs put me a lot in contact with all races of people in this country, because as the minister, being on the ground, it meant that I had to relate very articulately with members of the Afro-Guyanese community, wherever they might be. I had to go into many of these villages, travel extensively in the interior as well to meet with the Amerindian people, because all over the country, security has always been a big issue. And so it was my task to go and explain to people, whether Afro-Guyanese, whether Amerindians, whatever they might be, to explain to them what tasks that the government had undertaken to treat with the whole question of safety and security of the communities and as individuals.
Clement, I hear you, but I just wanted to come back to this point because it's critical.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone who's lived in Guyana, observed Guyanese politics, any Guyanese can deny that there is a broad racial division in the country, which is reflected politically. That at the last Congress, the PPP repudiated the Marxist-Leninists ideology as its founder, which really would have given comfort to a lot of non-Indians to the argument that you're saying. So what is it, having eliminated Marxism as the basis for the PPP's ideology, what is it that's left to give people comfort that this is just not an Indian party?
Again, it comes back to your personal convictions. What is it that you are convinced about in terms of national politics and the world outside the country that you live? So that the doing away of Marxist ideology or Marxist-Leninist ideology from the PPP, in a sense, created the opportunity for you to have ideological freedom so that you were no longer shackled by the party to adhere to a specific type of ideology, which gives persons who still adhere to that ideology the freedom to express themselves ideologically. So you can still write along Marxist lines, you can still express Marxist views, because in fact, you're not doing anything injurious or harmful to the party because of the fact that the party has now gotten rid of that. So for those who are still believe in the kind of ideology that I'm talking about, they have greater freedom of expression now to discuss and to write about those matters. Now, the membership of the party will obviously read about what you say or hear about what you talk about, listen to what you talk about. And the question of what you write and what you speak, how you put your views over, that's the only way, as I see it, that will be able to convince people of the correctness of your views. Because nowadays people read a lot and they are more exposed than before to what is happening in Guyana and the world at large.
Okay, so the party of Jagan is no more. It's a different party from that. Leah, do you want to?
I wouldn't say so. The party of Jagan, when it comes to Marxism, is not the case any longer. But the party of Jagan, insofar as people-centered politics and pursuing programs and policies, for example, in housing, in water, in public health, in education, it remains the same.
We probably will. We likely will come back to this, and I can see people are posting comments about this. Leah, let's not shut you out of this.
Thank you, Kojo. All right, Mr. Rohee, I'm gonna just bring your attention into a different direction with regard to foreign affairs right now. So I'm gonna start my first question by quoting our Foreign Secretary, Mr. Robert Prasad, just to give my first question a little bit of context. So he's quoted in a recent Facebook posting, giving that we have close to 100,000 persons of direct and indirect Venezuelan ancestry currently in Guyana. Shouldn't this reality give all Guyanese a cause to be alert? People's vigilance is equivalent to people's power and defense. End of quote. My first question is based on this post made by our foreign secretary. And I just want to know, in your opinion, should we share the concern highlighted by Mr. Prasad? More so, is it enough to express this concern?
First of all, I do not follow Mr. Prasad's Facebook page or threads. At my age, I tend to be much more conservative and much more judicious in what I read and what I listen to, because there's so much information out there. One has to be extremely judicious in taking into your brain cells what you read and what you do not. Now, But I would say this, having not read or listened to what Mr. Prasad may have said, I have been paying general attention to this problem or to the issue that you raised, because I think most Guyanese have been. But given my understanding and appreciation of this phenomena, I would say the following. Now, Mr. Maduro has created an economic, or has in his country, a serious economic crisis. As a result of that, as we all know, thousands, if not a couple millions, of Venezuelans have left and gone out of the country. Some have come to Guyana. My thinking is that we should welcome them, but at the same time, be vigilant, because they could very well be elements among those who may have left or may have been sent by the Maduro administration to collect intelligence or information about what is happening in Guyana. We should not be naive not to believe that that is happening. And so the question of alertness and the sensitivity of the issue is very important. Nevertheless, because we have seen in other countries where autocratic governments of the type that we have in Venezuela have used the question of the safety of their citizens, the question of the well-being of their citizens as a pretext to intervene and to carry out aggressive actions, claiming that they're doing so to protect their nationals, is another dimension to this subject. And I think that is precisely why the current administration has dealt with this question in a very considerate and in a very, for want of a better word, agreeable, I don't want to use the word cautious, in a very agreeable way, because we know that President Maduro has in the past carried out or initiated certain aggressive action against our country. And it wouldn't strike me as strange if he were to use any action, the smallest degree of action, against, because constitutionally those people are still Venezuelan nationals. And constitutionally, he could use his constitutional right to say, look, I don't like the way the government of Guyana is treating my nationals, even though they may be there as refugees or whatever the case may be. And therefore, it is my task to take care of them. Now, how you define take care of them is another matter. So I'm saying then, holistically, while on the one hand, we shouldn't, the whole question of immigration, security of our borders has to be maintained at all costs. So the immigration authorities have to fulfill their mandate in keeping with the laws of Guyana. That way, control is established. Assuming many others were able to get into the country legally and or illegally, then you have this huge number, which I saw recently was announced in the parliament, which ought to be managed. You have something called managed migration. You have a huge number of these people, of Venezuelan nationals in the country. And so one has to manage that in a way that, on the one hand, does not make Guyanese feel that they are being given first preference over Guyanese, and that Guyanese are becoming second-class citizens, so to speak. And on the other, giving leverage to Mr. Maduro to use any action that he, in his own judgment, might consider necessary to intervene on their behalf. So, on balance, I think it's a delicate question which we have to always keep in mind. I notice nowadays, if you walk around the city, go to different parts of Georgetown, you will see a number of these people working, which I think is good. At least they're earning a decent living. Some or the other they're making out, but law enforcement has to fulfill their responsibilities to treat with any untoward activity, an illegal activity, whether it has to do with larceny, housebreaking, any criminal offense, law enforcement has to deal with that, and should not discriminate from one against the other. At the bottom of the line, it's Guyanese that must be always given maximum consideration.
Yeah. No, thanks for that very comprehensive answer, Clement. I want to bring together the issue of the immigrants together with the continuing challenge we have in Guyana, which is one around national unity, particularly since, as you know, the 1985 Unity Accord was scuppered by President Burnham's untimely death. What is your position on the issue around shared governance and national unity? And we've got a couple of follow-on questions, so we need to be a little briefer. Well, what's your take on it?
We have tried shared governance on several occasions in the past. The last occasion was under Mr. Corbyn, and then Mr. Hoyt, and then Mr. Corbyn. Attempts have been made to that effect, both at the parliamentary level and at the inter-party level, vis-a-vis decisions in the cabinet. Shared governance has a lot to do with the whole question of trust. And I think there are many experiences around the world, and I always have to relate to that. There are experiences around the world where the whole question of trust is a big phenomena in determining how shared governance should work, if at all it should. But our country is very peculiar, apart from the whole question of trust. And so there's a whole historical precedence behind this question of shared governance. And I don't think it's something that ought to be a top-down. It ought to be a bottom-up methodology towards that objective. My final point on this is the following. It has to come in time. It is not something that could be forced. It's not something that could be enforced. It's not something that could be done by edict. It has to come as a natural development within the population. You know, we're seeing things happening. I am seeing things happening. And I'm very happy to see what is happening in terms of the migration of persons from one political party to another. And I don't want to be too specific on that, but I can see two things. A lot of Afro-Guyanese who are alienated or for some reason disaffected with the People's National Congress or APNUFC are gradually, I'm not saying they're moving en masse, they're gradually moving over to other political parties. And I think the major beneficiary has been the PPP, perhaps because they're the governing party. Because they're the government, they have much more to offer, and they can put out much more hope to the people. So shared governance is a matter, in my view, will take time. But the foundations for it must be gradually laid in a purposeful way through policies, through programs, where people must be able to trust, to say, yes, we trust you, we're prepared to move in that direction.
And just one quick one before I bring Leah back in. At the Elections Commission, that surely must be one of the areas where trust has to be built. And it's not very clear that the government always either behaves in a way or allows the other members of the commission to behave in a way which shows that they trust them as Guyanese rather than treating them as political opponents.
The key thing for me in the Elections Commission is how democratic it is, how tolerant, the degree of tolerance that takes place within the commission. To quickly dispense with that, I've sat in that commission for almost a year now. And what strikes me as unusual, and maybe this is one of the features or one of the characteristics of a judge, that they can sit for hours and listen to back and forth discussions on a single issue, and then come back to it at another meeting to hear another round of back and forth. So the degree of tolerance and the degree of, I think the best word here is democracy, that obtains in the commission, where every person has the ability to speak. If they want to speak 100 times, they are allowed to speak 100 times, whether from the government or the opposition. But at the end of the day, we cannot continue discussing ad nauseum. We have at some point in time to arrive at a decision, because we have to hold an election and we have constitutional deadlines to meet. And if we just continue discussing without reaching decisions, whether by unanimity, if we can, or by majority, then we have to.
Okay. Leah, do you want to jump back in? Leah? Okay, Leah is not, I don't think Leah is hearing me.
Yeah,
let me
sure.
just,
Mr. Rohee, can
Yeah.
you share with us, are you hearing me?
I am hearing you. I am hearing you.
Are you guys
go ahead,
hearing me?
Leah.
Okay, great. Mr. Rohee, can you share with us okay. Can you share at least one policy you would propose to be changed to,
One policy I would like to see change in which area?
all right. Yes. One policy you would propose.
Clement, why don't you I think that this is in respect of the elections, the way in which we hold elections. Why don't you take that question?
Yeah. And just to note, she's been having some internet issues, so
Right.
that could be an issue.
So Clement, one policy you'd like to see changed. Actually, let's ask you for briefly one policy in the areas of home affairs, foreign affairs, and then I want to deal with some other issues.
Well, one of the policy issue is to move from a police force to a police service. This is extremely important given the image in people's minds of what constitutes a force. Because normally people would see the word force as mean use of force to accomplish law enforcement, whatever the manifestation might be. So I would like to see a police force being rebranded or renamed a Guyana Police Service. Because that would, to my mind, create a more favorable impression in the minds and the psyche of our citizens that here is a force that has, and by the way, this ought not to be anything cosmetic. It has to be structural. It has to be totally institutional. Now, every policy has problems with implementation because it's not the politicians. The politicians articulate the policy, yes, but it's the bureaucracy, it's the public service, it's the machinery that has to implement the policy. And that sometimes has problem. But be that as it may, I'm not making that a major issue. Policy-wise, I would like to see a restructured police force I would like to see the force named the Guyana Police Service. And I would like to see greater civilian oversight over law enforcement.
Okay.
Now, when I say greater civilian oversight, I mean within the meaning of the Police Act, within the meaning of the Constitution, and within the meaning of the Police Act. But there are ways in which civilians can play a role in assisting the police force to become more appreciative of what the public has to offer and what they can take from the public as well. In terms of elections, I would want to wait until we have the Constitutional Reform Commission meet. That is precisely when the changes could be recommended in terms of constitutional reform. A lot of things that, for example, people are talking about is, let's go back to first past the post, to the constituency. Some people are also talking about, let's have a Senate and a House, like they have in Trinidad and some other CARICOM countries. So I think what is happening here is that people usually look for a greater degree of inclusivity. And there are different entry points that they articulate where, for them, there could be greater inclusivity of the people.
Right. And Clement, I'm just wondering, because you proposed a notion which I think most people will find attractive, of sort of citizen participation. And how about when you have cases where there are clearly egregious failures, as currently with the Adriana Young case, and yet we see no changes in the leadership and the direction of the directors in the police service? Does that strike you as being the sort of things that should obtain?
Well, I'm not so sure whether that is something that requires changes in the leadership of the force. Listen, in a democracy, in a liberal democracy, for example, if we have our parliamentary democracy, the beauty with it is that people have the opportunity to express themselves in other shape or form. And what I like with our democracy is, one of the peculiarities we have in our democracy is the multi-ethnic, multiracial characterization or character of our democracy. The multi-religious also. And that, in my view, is what gives expression to people to say whether they're for or against or supportive. And that question that you just raised there, we have in the case that you just mentioned, we should look at that as one of the ways in which democracy allows people to express their freedoms, which is according to the Constitution. However, freedoms, as we know, are relative. I should not use my freedom to trample on the freedom of somebody else's, because then that's when we begin to have problems. So I think for me, the main thing is to safeguard this democracy and to build on what we have here now. Okay. We were one time talking about a national democracy, but for me, all these views that we hear, whether in the newspapers, the radio, podcasts, on the streets, social media, or whatever, that is good for our democracy, because it means people are not having the opportunity to let 1,000 flowers bloom.
Well, Mal would certainly be happy with that analogy. We're moving towards the last couple of minutes, and this is just some quickies. You were once touted as a potential presidential candidate. What happened?
Well, there was a democratic process. Names were floated. And in the process of that, there was, of course, an internal democratic process, give and take, discussions on issues like that. And the outcome of that democratic process, internal party democracy that took place, you can't have 2 or 3 people emerging as the candidate. There has to be one. And once one candidate emerges, then everybody has to, gather around or
Democratic
support them.
centralism.
Well, if you want to call it that, because you see, a lot of people don't understand the thing. Let me quickly say, because I know you're coming to closing time. Democratic centralism means that we all express democratically our views. It happens in boards, it happens in business. Once the directors agree on an issue and that is signed off, I think it would be anti-democratic for a director to go out there and disagree publicly.
We want to quickly, because Leah's back. Leah, do you have a quick question?
Yeah.
Oh, Leah doesn't seem to be hearing us. We seem to have some connectivity issues. Well, listen, Clement, do you want to make a quick comment, 30 seconds, before we have a summing up?
On
anything that you may have wanted to mention, which you didn't get an opportunity to.
Well, I think Leah was aiming to answer a question of that nature, but she didn't.
Yeah, Leah keeps popping in and out. I think we're going to have to do without the benefit of her input this time. So, Clement, anything you'd like to mention before? There's one last question I want to ask you.
Well, I want to say this, that we are at a stage now in our country where the prospects for a very, very prosperous Guyana is emerging. And I'm talking about this from my heart. I'm not talking like this as a politician, but I'm a Guyanese and I've born and grown in this city, especially in Georgia. I'm basically a town man, town boy, so to speak. And I've lived to see. We've moved from red roads. That road that you're traveling now to Mary, that was a red road. The road on the east bank, on the east coast, running parallel to the train, was a red road. The road on the Essequibo coast, from various parts to Adventure, was a red road. We had sometimes 4 or 5 cars in the city of Georgetown. This has changed so dramatically over my lifetime. I've seen a more educated population. I talk to my granddaughters and they tell me things that they have learned. And I'm happy that the Vice President has spoken about civic education. You and I know that in our school days, we used to have civic education. Where it disappeared to, I can't say. But I'm saying to our listeners that I am a proud Guyanese because, look, we have our problems. I don't want to sweep that under the carpet. And I know that the president and the vice president and the cabinet, particularly those 2 gentlemen at the top, people may not like them for whatever reason. But I sit with them from time to time in meetings and I hear them trying to grapple with issues. When they grapple with the issue and they found a solution, then it comes out in the public. But this question of washing dirty linen in public is not something that is helpful. So all I want to say in this quick seconds that you've given me is that this country, I don't see it moving backward. I see it move. I may not live to see it in my lifetime. I may not live to see it in my lifetime, but I can tell your viewers this. We have to be like the Rastafari man and develop positive vibrations when it comes to the future of this country. You and I know the difficulties which we've gone through, the riots, the disturbances, the murder, the killing, but we are still here as a nation. We're now threatened by Maduro. We've been threatened before. We've overcome these things, not to our complete satisfaction, but we're still here as a country. And we have to love this. If we don't love it, then we have much more to lose. This is one love affair that we can't afford to engage in a divorce.
Unfortunately, you can't divorce. It's not an option. And Clement, thanks a lot. Thanks for sharing the hope that as we move forward, we're going to be moving towards some sort of shared governance and that public participation the public democracy, which we all value so much, will become a more and more important piece of it. And I want to say that you seem to have a lot more years than the beard suggests, the new look suggests. So please continue to give us the benefit of your wisdom going forward. Thanks again for coming on Nation Building. And
Thank you.
I have to have you back because we haven't been able to get to some of the comments and the questions. There's a lot more there, I think, that we can delve into. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank Leah. And thank the good doctor who I always follow on Facebook. I follow his pages. I follow his comments and so on. He's always starting out with hello, good people, and so forth. So thank you very much for inviting me to the show.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
The good doctor, do you want to say anything in closing?
Thank you very much. I think Clement Rohee is a Guyanese of genuine distinction, and I think we're all very appreciative of the service to the nation. And I think the photos and his responses to these questions reflected that care, and as he rightly ended, the love for Guyana. So on behalf of all of our folks, thank you. It really made the point of what we were trying to do here. Thanks.
Thank you, Doctor.
Positive vibrations.
Positive vibrations.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us again. See you in a fortnight.